So on August 13th, 2022, my friend Jonah Holland and I went on a bike ride outside of the city, and we rode our bikes on the Virginia Capitol Trail out into Henrico, and we took a right turn on Osborne Turnpike, and about 5 minutes later, around 7:30 in the morning, we were hit by a drunk driver who was driving about estimated 60 miles an hour, and Jonah was killed in the crash right there on Osborne Turnpike, and I was catapulted into the ditch where I sustained a lot of life-threatening injuries, and we were very lucky to have some bystanders drive by shortly after the crash who were able to render some medical aid to me, and they were able to try to do CPR on Jonah, but ultimately Jonah passed away before the EMTs arrived, and I was taken to VCU Trauma Center, where I spent a month in the trauma unit, about 5 days in the ICU, and then into the trauma unit. And then I moved to a nursing facility where I spent 1 month relearning how to walk. And then I was discharged from there, and I went home and spent about another 6 months in outpatient PT, relearning how to walk well. It's now been about 2 years since the crash, and I would say I'm mostly recovered. There are definitely things that I'll never be able to do again in my life, like running. I'll never be able to do like a lot of jumping or anything that's like high impact. I have a lot of hardware that's in my body, orthopedic hardware, in my pelvis and in one of my collarbones. And so I'll be somewhat physically limited for the rest of my life, but overall I've been able to make a pretty good recovery, and I'm really grateful for that. And we saw kind of justice served for the crash about 1 year after the incident. The driver who hit us was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Really, it was 30 years with 20 suspended, but he will be in Virginia State Prison for at least 7 years before he's out on parole. And it was a nice way to have some closure for the accident, and just to kind of see things kind of wrapped up. And so we're grateful to have some type of closure in such a traumatic crash and a traumatic incident, but definitely the memory of Jonah Holland and her loss is still very sharp and very painful for a lot of people in the community. I think the crash and the aftermath and the recovery from the crash has impacted me in a lot of ways. I think physically is obviously there's been a lot to overcome. Mentally, I think I've gone through some periods, like some different chapters of my mental state, and kind of unpacking trauma and unpacking how this will affect me forever. I think that how it's affected me is it's definitely made me maybe a bit more circumspect and a bit more nervous about certain things. I still ride bikes. I got back on a bike about 6 months after the crash, so it hasn't stopped me from enjoying the things that I love, but I'm definitely a little wiser. I feel a little older. I feel like I've gone through some really unfortunate experiences that have made me think twice about some of the activities that I might otherwise partake in, like hiking up mountains. Like, I'm definitely more nervous about getting re-injured. And then I will say that maybe it would seem that this whole experience would make me a little more negative towards people or a little less trustful, but I actually don't think that's the case for me. But I think I've been able to unpack all of that and come to a place of just forgiveness and understanding, but also knowing that the way that I handle this can be kind of an inspiration for other people. And Like, we can go through like really, really hard experiences in our lives and still come out on the other side as the people who we want to be. We don't have to let tragedy or trauma take away the golden parts of who we are as people. So I do think that the crash has made me, in general, it's made me think more carefully about what I choose to do. But I do think it's also made me generally a more compassionate and understanding person, particularly in relating to other people who have gone through terrible injuries and experienced trauma in their own lives. The experience of sharing about my traumatic crash has, it's given me the opportunity to make connections with other people that I wouldn't have otherwise maybe had the opportunity to do. When I'm sharing openly and vulnerably about what happened to me, I do think that other people feel more comfortable sharing openly and vulnerably about the things that have happened to them. And so I feel more connected to the community than I did before. I think it's important for people to remember that the choices they make affect others. And when we're talking about drinking and driving, you maybe could have just a couple of drinks and think that you're okay to drive and that you have the right to do so. But ultimately, the choice that you're making is endangering other people and potentially maybe robbing someone of their loved one, their mother, their sister, their friend. Drinking and driving is just a choice that we don't need to make. There are so many legal ramifications that come with drinking and driving. Then there's also the social fallout and the social ramifications of injuring someone else or putting your own body in harm's way. And it's just a choice that can so easily be avoided. We all have rideshare apps now. It's not even expensive to catch an Uber or a Lyft. There's really no reason to be drinking and driving. You put yourself at risk, you put other people at risk, and ultimately the poor choices that you make when you get behind the wheel after drinking could permanently affect other people in your community and rob us even more so of our sense of safety and sanctity in this community.